Hello and welcome to PodFest. I'm super happy because Podster is back to active pop-up studio recording, and we are really honored to be at the pop-up studio at PodFest this year. And we have our first guest, Mahreen. Hi, Mahreen. Mahreen is a content creator, so we're going to catch a lot of really great, talented, and successful content creators today. Mahreen, hi.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm great. Very excited to be here. I'm happy that I'm your first guest. So you're starting off with me. I hope I set the right standard.
Totally. Mahreen, could you quickly introduce yourself? Like, what is your podcast about? What do you do in your life? Is this your main business, or do you do anything else?
Yeah, so I am Pakistani, born and raised in the UAE. So I'm a UAE kid, and I wanted to start a podcast that highlights both my cultures, which is UAE, but also South Asia. So we started a podcast called Karak with Mehreen, where we have Karak with our guests, and we talk about South Asian communities. We talk about our cultures, the challenges, the beauties. So it's a very culture-based podcast. And yeah, it's been around a little over a year since I started. I am a student, but this is my main project, my main business that I started a year ago, and it's been going quite well. So I'm hoping that I will continue it for quite a while.
Why podcasts, if I may ask?
I think the thing about podcasts, and the reason it's also booming so well, that everyone is so attracted to podcasts, is that it's an organic conversation. There's so much overconsumption and overproduction of content. There's so much content out there that now the consumers are smart. They could tell when something is fake, when something is salesy, when something is kind of scripted. So there was a need for something more raw, natural, organic. So podcast just became the perfect way to do it. And even for me personally, I love having conversations. Like when you asked me to join, I was like, let's do it. I'm so excited. I love having conversations with people. And so do other people like hearing it. And so I think that's why podcast became such a big thing.
How big was your audience when you started, and has it grew because of what you're doing?
Yeah, my audience was zero. I started from...
Oh, seriously?
Yeah, I started from nothing. The Karak with Mehreen page was at 0 followers. I did have a personal page, which was also quite small. And now we're around 210,000 followers across platforms in over a year. We've reached around 110 million views. We just saw last week, which is insane to me. I'm still like processing that. So we started from scratch, and the best thing about podcasts, the reason it worked so well is, again, the organic side of things. One is just having it as a raw conversation. And number two is just focusing so much on the topics you're talking about. I spent a lot of time on the actual topic that I want to be discussing, the research I want to conduct for that. It's so obvious, but it really plays a role in...
When we say page, we mean the Instagram page, right? Not the podcasting page.
So I'm talking about Instagram, but we also post on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify. But when we talk about like short form content, it's Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts.
So tell me about it. You started doing your podcast as a video first.
Yeah. Video and audio.
What was the idea behind that?
I think... Of course, there's a lot of audio podcasts, and I'm sure they do well when you're on the road, when you're driving, you can hear the audio, it works well. But video is really what attracts an audience, because with video, you can create that short form content. This is the truth, no one is going to watch you for 1 hour if you haven't proved yourself, if you just give them a little taste of what it's about in those 20 seconds, in those little clips. So I always see it as a funnel. Many people talk about this as well. It's a funnel. Your long form 1 hour video podcast is in the bottom of the funnel. The top of the funnel is those short form clips that you're posting, because that's where the mass audience comes there. And then it funnels down, it shrinks, and then a percentage comes to your long form. You cannot go directly to the bottom because you didn't gain any, you didn't show anyone your value yet.
So, how long are your episodes?
An hour.
An hour.
Yeah.
So how did you make your listeners or watchers, let's say, to watch an hour of your episode? And how did it grow? Tell me the journey.
Yeah, so in the very beginning, I did as many podcasts as I could because when you're starting off, you really need to practice. You think you're great, and that's fine if you think that. I'm sure you are. But when you're in front of the camera, of course, you get nervous. There's things you forget. So in the beginning, I was like, as many guests as I can invite, as many episodes as I can record, I'm gonna record. And I did that. And that really, like, if you watch my first episode and my last episode, recent one, you will see such a big difference because you can tell I'm nervous. You can tell like the way I'm acting. So for everyone, like practice. Even if you invite, my first episode was with my sister, so you can invite someone you're comfortable with, and then you go on, right? So for me, it was big thing was practicing, and the second big thing, especially in the beginning, I know you want to focus on the quality of your podcast episode, which is great, but you need to, your priority, to be honest, needs to be your short form clips, because that is where you get the eyeballs, and then afterwards, as people start watching your episodes, you can start prioritizing making your episodes better and better.
How do you select the topics? Do you analyze what flies with your audience now?
This is a big thing. A lot of people are like, I don't want to start my podcast yet because I want to finalize my niche. I want to finalize the target audience, which is great. Of course, you should have an idea. When I started, I had a very broad idea. I was like, I want to talk about philosophy. I want to talk about psychology. It was so vague. So when I invited my guests, we would just have a conversation. We would talk a lot about life and happiness. It was very broad. But it was great that I started it. I started it after a couple of episodes, after a couple of clips went out. I realized the most interesting topics, the most interesting episodes for me and for my audience was the culture side of things, talking about culture, really going deep into social taboos. I was like, this is where I feel like I'm connected to and my audience shows an interest. So I doubled down on that. And now for the past year, that's the main focus that I've been for the podcast. So for anyone starting off, don't spend too much time on perfecting your niche and your target audience, because it's going to be a waste of time. You're probably going to change it as you start.
How do you maintain the quality of the conversation? So most probably, so when you create your episodes, and now with time you have an experience already, what flies, what your listeners like, probably certain things. How do you maintain? Do you have enough speakers? How do you go in depth of a specific topics?
So as in, how do I select my topics? Is that the question?
Yeah. How do you maintain the quality
of the
conversation? Yeah.
So the first thing is obviously analyzing what content is performing well. So for me, I started posting a variety of topics. I would post about the UAE. I would post about South Asian history, so the subcontinent, the history. I would post about taboos, like contemporary issues. These were the 3 different topics I tried out. And what I realized was that social taboos, they work really well. They're the most, they get a lot of attention, a lot of engagement. People relate to it a lot, even though I love the history. But I had to sacrifice a little bit because I know this is where the taboos is where people really feel engaged with. So then I started focusing a lot more on that. So it has a lot to do with analyzing. Like, don't just put out content. In the beginning, put it out, like variety as much, but then see what is actually working. So for me, it was the social taboos. So now that I've figured out, okay, this is working, what can I talk about under this? How do I find subtopics? For me particularly, I use my stories a lot, asking my audience, okay, what issues do you like to talk about? So ask your audience. Like, that's the easiest way to do it. Directly ask your audience. Number 2 is Reddit. I use Reddit quite a lot, like just Googling what people online are talking about. And number 3 is, if you have YouTube, if you're posting on YouTube, you can actually see what your audience, what channels your audience likes. So you can see what kind of content, what other content your audience is looking at. So that gives me a lot of inspiration too.
That's interesting. But when did you see that jump from 0 to a certain number of follows, let's say, and you realize that this is going really to become a project of my life, let's put it this way?
It was actually one particular video that kind of blew up. It was I think a month and a half after I started the podcast. It was a video about, we were talking about the UAE and how I had an Emirati guest. She's a wonderful journalist, and she was talking about her experience traveling abroad, and that people used to have this misconception about this region and how she tackled that and challenged that. A very simple video, but a very powerful one. That one blew up. It got like 2 million views, but that, because of that video, I saw this spike in following. I think we got like 5,000, 6,000 in just that one clip. And then after that, there was this other video where I talked about, I don't know if I can mention it here, but I talked about alcohol and just my opinion on alcohol, how I think because of my cultural values. That video, I think, has 24 million views, which is insane to me. 24 million, single video, and that got me like 15,000 followers in a single video. So yeah, I think there were certain videos that perform really well, but in order for you to reach that video, you first need to be making the bad videos. You first need to be putting out the okay content, the average content, until finally you get to that 24 million or the whatever million. So yeah, I think put it out there. Eventually you will reach a clip where you're like, okay, this is performing well, this is my topic, this is my niche, I'm gonna go forward with that. And that's exactly what happened with me. Yeah.
What do you study at the university?
I studied computer science, actually. Computational systems, it's called. I'm in my last year of university. Yeah.
Do you find technology being an interesting topic? I know it's a very narrow topic to probably explore, narrow and wide at the same time. It depends on the context, right?
I think technology is it's a very specific niche, and even though it is narrow, there's an audience for it. It's so great to have a very specific niche, a narrow niche that you eventually target, because there's always it's harder for you to compete with the big players that have a mass audience. You don't want to target that mass audience. That's for them. It's okay, leave it to them. What you can target is those specific niches, because you think it's small, but it's not small. They have like millions of people who watch technology podcasts. So there's a lot of money involved in tech podcasts, because there's a lot of tech firms that want to fund these kind of that want to sponsor. So technology podcasts work really well.
So your media project is now a real business, right?
Yeah.
How do you monetize it? So how do you monetize your audience, the content that you're creating? Maybe a few words about that.
Yeah, so there's many different ways people have monetized. Currently, the best way that I've been able to monetize, one is obviously master sponsors. So there's brands that reach out that see value in what I'm doing, and they see an alignment in the Karak with Mehreen in the brand itself. So they sponsor a season. The second route is PR companies or brands who want to feature their CEOs, and they want to pay for their CEO to be featured, because this is technically PR for them. It's a new form of PR. Podcasts have revolutionized the PR industry, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely. So I wanted to tap into that a little bit. So do you think, this accessibility of the media tools, and podcast is a media tool or a channel, right, that is quite accessible to individual creators or the brands? Do you think it is driving a certain trend in how brands should approach their marketing? So what's your view on that?
For sure, this is the best way for brands to be marketing right now. And this may be, a lot of people might disagree with that, but it's true. Podcasting is the best way for a brand to show their personality, because at this day and age, it is we are not sold by salesy content. We don't like seeing content that's like, oh, buy this, buy that. No one cares at this point, unless you have a story, you have a personality that you want to showcase, and the podcast is the best way to do that. So that's why right now, because in UAE, in Dubai, podcasts are booming, brands are realizing that this is a form of marketing. I need to tap into this. So it's still growing. I think companies have not realized the potential yet. but it's still growing. And now more and more companies, I feel like, need to realize the potential of podcasting because it's really revolutionary.
Since I'm on a mission sort of to help brands realize the importance of, positioning within podcasting, and I know the biggest pain behind that is that they need a good content. They need a consistently good content to be able to advertise or place their products within that. So maybe you could give me a few, maybe one specific example of how do you think your specific content worked really well for a certain brand.
Interesting. So you're asking me, brands are confused with topics, like the topics they want to talk about?
One of the pain is that, first of all, you need to discover a good show, right?
Course.
Then you need to understand that this is a consistently good show. And individual creators, they need time to grow. They need time to realize their niche. And then they need means, right? They need sources, resources to be able to produce it and sustain until they reach the first sponsor. So, and I think that's the biggest sort of, not a gap, but something for our region to grow up to, right? And that's why I'm usually fascinated by creators like you who grew your audience to a bigger one and now are converting it into a certain business. So you've got your point of view. Maybe you give us a specific example of how a brand can implement either their founder or their product or their marketing campaign with your specific show and get better results.
So one way that I've seen work really well is doing mini series. So what that means is you partner with a brand, and sometimes brands don't have people that can talk in front of a camera. So they don't want any of their faces to be seen. Okay, that's fine. But they do want their brand, their logo to be seen. So if they sponsor a mini series, for example, let me think of an example, a tea company wants to sponsor, right? And they don't want to show their CEO. They want us to be talking about the topics and collabing with them, right? I could make 5 episodes sponsored by that tea company, and each of those episodes I will not talk about the tea company. I will talk about topics related to the tea company that they are passionate about. For example, tea. I could have one episode talking about the history of tea and how chai came to the UAE and how it evolved, and it's very relevant to them, even though I'm not talking about their brand. It's just their brand is just there. That is the perfect way to collab with the brand because it's organic, it's not forced, and the logo is there, but I'm talking about things that they relate to. The second episode could be about, I don't know, if one is about chai, the other one is about Karak, for example. This is a very vague example that I'm giving, but you can obviously find ways to analyze topics. I would never say have an episode promoting the company.
Yeah.
That does not make sense. If you're just having an episode where you invite someone, you're like, tell me about your company, how did it start? It's too fake. Unless your podcast is about business. If it's about business, okay. But if it's not even about business, then it makes no sense. Find a topic relevant to them and their brand will just be there in the background.
It's interesting, but why do you think that this is going to be more efficient than anything else that they were doing in marketing? It's a fair question because we just need to understand and give the brands a clue why podcasting is really very efficient in some ways.
Honestly, if brands are spending their money on billboards, they're spending their money on being featured on newspaper articles, no one is looking, no one is watching that, and you're spending so much money on it. Of course, there is some value to it, there's some credibility to it, it adds credibility, but does it help in sales? Does it help in getting leads? Does it actually help in reaching mass audiences? No. What actually helps is short form content. That is what we need to. The social media has revolutionized for us. So we need to be exploiting that. And one best way to be exploiting short form content, easiest and best way is podcasts, because you are having a real conversation, you're showing your personality, and people connect with people. They don't connect with brands or companies, they connect with people.
Nice. No, I like this message. And Maureen, frankly, thank you very much for sharing all the insights from your show. And also, I can feel like you've got a lot, since you were building this project by yourself, right? You've got a lot of that marketing vision that came naturally. And thank you very much for sharing
Thank
that
you.
one.
I love
And
that.
how much time does it take you to create all this, considering you're a student as well? So when do you do that?
In all my breaks, 1 hour break between class, I'll be working on scripting, on preparing topics. Whatever breaks I have, I work on this. So.
I'm pretty sure it's going to pay back. So
I hope.
and good luck with your podcast show. We're
Thank
staying
you.
in touch.
You
And
too.
Yeah,
You
definitely. And we're going to attract a lot of B2B brands to do podcasting as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Thank you.